Margaret Anderson, a 73-year-old grandmother, had been robbed of her life by a medical system that treated symptoms with expensive pills while ignoring the root cause of her suffering. Doctors kept prescribing medication after medication, each promising relief but delivering only side effects that left her feeling like a stranger in her own body, unable to even hold her granddaughter. But when her neighbor Dorothy revealed a shockingly simple remedy, just lemon and baking soda mixed in a specific ratio, everything Margaret thought she knew about healing was turned upside down. Listen to how this 2-week transformation gave Margaret back not just her health, but her ability to lift Emma into her arms again, and why this pennies per day solution threatens everything the pharmaceutical industry wants you to believe. The pre-dawn darkness still clung to the corners of Margaret Anderson's kitchen as she stood at the counter, her trembling fingers reaching toward the array of orange prescription bottles that stood in a neat, accusing row. 73 years old, and somehow these plastic containers had become her morning companions, her first thought upon waking, her constant reminder of everything her body had become. Each bottle bore a different label, a different promise, a different doctor's attempt to manage what had become unmanageable. She picked up the first bottle with both hands, her right hand steadying her left, compensating for the weakness that had crept into her grip over the past months. The childproof cap mocked her. She had to use a rubber gripper now, the kind advertised on late-night television for seniors who couldn't open jars anymore. When had she become that person? When had the simple act of twisting a cap become a battle? Margaret's joints ached with a deep, grinding intensity that made her breath catch. It wasn't the sharp pain of an injury that might heal. It was constant, relentless, a dull roar that had become the background noise of her existence. Lifting her coffee cup, that simple porcelain mug her grandson had painted for her at summer camp, felt like hoisting a boulder. Her wrists protested, her knuckles screamed, her fingers, swollen and stiff, barely closed around the handle. She remembered mornings when she'd spring out of bed, eager to start the day. Now getting out of bed required planning, strategic positioning, and often tears she refused to shed. The doctors meant well, she supposed. Dr. Harris had prescribed the anti-inflammatory. Dr. Chen had added something for the pain. The rheumatologist had layered on another medication, then another when the first didn't work. Each prescription came with the same practice smile, the same assurance that this one might be different. But they weren't different. The side effects list read like a horror story: nausea, dizziness, liver problems, stomach bleeding, increased risk of heart attack. She'd traded one kind of suffering for another. Worse still, the medications didn't even work. The pain remained. The stiffness persisted. And now she felt like a stranger occupying her own skin, disconnected and foggy, as if she were watching her life through a smudged window. Margaret pressed her palms flat against the cool granite countertop, seeking relief in the cold stone. Immediately, the familiar stabbing sensation shot through her wrists, sharp needles that made her gasp. The arthritis had been subtle at first, a little stiffness in the morning, a slight ache after gardening. She dismissed it as normal aging, something everyone dealt with. But over the past 2 years, it had spread through her hands like a wildfire consuming dry brush, merciless and destructive. Her hands, God, her hands. They'd been her pride once. Strong hands that had kneaded bread dough, planted tomato seedlings, knitted countless scarves and blankets for church fundraisers. She'd written poetry in leather-bound journals, her cursive flowing and elegant. She'd played piano at community events, her fingers dancing across the keys with confidence and joy. Now those same hands were twisted, swollen, nearly useless. The knitting needles sat in a basket by her armchair, untouched for 8 months. The garden outside her kitchen window had become overgrown with weeds, her raised beds that she'd built with her late husband, now a tangled mess she couldn't bear to look at. Last Christmas, she'd bought printed cards instead of writing personal notes to her grandchildren. The shame of that still burned. Emma, her youngest granddaughter, had asked why Grandma didn't write her special messages anymore. Margaret had made up an excuse about being too busy, watching Emma's face fall with disappointment. The phone call from Sarah last night replayed in Margaret's mind like a recording she couldn't stop. Her daughter's voice had been so cheerful, so artificially bright. In that way, adult children speak to aging parents when they're trying not to acknowledge the decline they're witnessing. Mom, Emma's birthday party is next Saturday. She's so excited. She wants you to see her new swing set. Can you come? Please say you'll come. Margaret had frozen, phone pressed to her ear, searching desperately for an excuse that wouldn't reveal the truth. The truth that she could barely walk from her car to the front door without needing to rest. That stairs had become her enemy. that the thought of bending down to Emma's level to give her a proper hug filled Margaret with such anxiety she wanted to cry. "I'm not sure, honey. I might have a doctor's appointment that day." A lie. She'd become so good at lying lately. "Mom, you always have doctor's appointments. Emma asks about you constantly. She misses her grandma." The guilt had twisted in Margaret's stomach like a knife. She missed Emma too. Missed all of them. But how could she let them see her like this? Shuffling instead of walking, grimacing with every movement, unable to lift a 5-year-old girl who weighed barely 40 pounds. She'd always been the strong grandmother, the one who gave piggyback rides and pushed swings and played hide-and-seek until everyone collapsed in giggles. That grandmother was gone. This new version, frail, limited, defeated, wasn't someone she wanted her grandchildren to remember. "I'll try, Sarah. I'll really try." Another lie, and they both knew it. The worst part, the truly unbearable part, wasn't even the physical pain. Margaret could have endured that. She'd endured childbirth, a broken leg from a skiing accident in her 40s, the grief of losing her husband 5 years ago. Physical pain was terrible, but it was comprehensible. It had a location, a source. This fog that had settled over her mind was different, more frightening, more isolating. She forgot appointments now, even with reminders written in 3 different places. Last week, she'd missed her hair appointment, something she'd never done in 40 years of going to the same salon. Conversation slipped away from her mid-sentence. She'd be talking to Sarah on the phone and suddenly lose her train of thought completely, words evaporating like steam. Names escaped her. She'd look at familiar objects at the coffee maker, the television remote, and momentarily forget what they were called or how they worked. Margaret felt herself disappearing bit by bit, like an old photograph left in the sun, slowly fading until nothing recognizable remained. Dr. Harris had mentioned it during her last visit, flipping through her chart with professional detachment. The cognitive issues could be related to chronic inflammation. When your body is in a constant state of inflammation, it affects everything including brain function. Toxins can build up in your system. It's complicated. Complicated. Everything was complicated. But what could she do about it? She'd tried elimination diets, cutting out gluten, dairy, sugar. She'd choked down turmeric supplements, fish oil, glucosamine, chondroitin, MSM, and alphabet soup of pills that promised relief and delivered nothing. She'd followed advice from health blogs, YouTube videos, well-meaning friends. Nothing worked. Nothing changed. The pain remained. The fog thickened. Margaret caught her reflection in the kitchen window as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. The woman staring back at her was unrecognizable. Gray hair, yes, but it was more than that. Her face had become gray, too colorless, drained of vitality. Her shoulders hunched forward in defeat. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity and joy, looked hollow. Exhausted. Old in a way that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with surrender. When had this happened? She searched her reflection for the woman she remembered, the one who'd hiked mountain trails, who'd volunteered at the food bank every Tuesday, who'd organized the church's annual fundraising dinner. The woman who'd hosted Thanksgiving for 20 people without breaking a sweat, who'd maintained flower gardens that neighbors admired, who'd been the first to help when someone needed assistance. That woman felt like a ghost now, a memory from someone else's life. The soft knock on the back door startled her. Before Margaret could respond, the door opened, Dorothy from next door, letting herself in as she had done every morning for the past 15 years. They'd traded emergency keys decades ago, back when their husbands were still alive, and they'd all been younger, healthier, full of plans for retirement adventures. Dorothy was 75, 2 years older than Margaret, but watching her move through the kitchen was like watching someone decades younger. She carried a wicker basket filled with glossy red tomatoes, their vines still attached, dirt still clinging to their roots. Fresh from the garden. Her garden. The garden she still tended every day. Dorothy's movements were fluid and confident. She set the basket on the table with ease, her back straight, her steps light. Her eyes sparkled with the alertness Margaret remembered having once, that engaged, present quality that came from a clear mind and a body that obeyed your commands. "Morning, Maggie," Dorothy said cheerfully, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "Brought you some tomatoes. The plants are absolutely going crazy this year. I've been giving them away to everyone on the block. I made sauce yesterday, and I've still got more ripening." Margaret forced her face into what she hoped resembled a smile. trying desperately to hide the envy that threatened to choke her. Dorothy still gardened. Dorothy still drove herself to the grocery store, to the library where she volunteered twice a week, to her book club meetings. Dorothy still lived a full, active, meaningful life. Meanwhile, Margaret could barely make it through a morning without needing to collapse into her armchair by noon, exhausted from the simple act of existing. The contrast was unbearable. They'd been equals once, friends who'd raised their children together, who'd supported each other through life's challenges. Now they existed on opposite sides of an invisible divide. Dorothy was aging gracefully, maintaining her independence and vitality. Margaret was declining, fading, losing pieces of herself every day. "You look tired, dear," Dorothy said gently, pulling out a chair and sitting down without waiting for an invitation. Her tone was kind, but Margaret heard the concern beneath it, the pity. "Are you sleeping?" Margaret's voice came out as a croak, thin and defeated. "Not really." She felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not again. "Everything hurts, Dorothy, all the time, every single moment, and I feel so lost. Like my brain isn't working right anymore. Like I'm disappearing." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She hadn't meant to be so honest, so vulnerable. But something about Dorothy's presence, her steadiness, her obvious health, broke down the walls Margaret had been carefully maintaining. Dorothy reached across the table and took Margaret's hand with exquisite care, mindful of the swollen joints, the tender spots. Her touch was warm and solid and real in a way that made Margaret want to sob. "Have you ever heard about detoxification, Maggie? Real detoxification, I mean. Not those expensive juice cleanses or supplement programs that cost hundreds of dollars." Margaret shook her head, already exhausted by the thought of researching something new, trying another failed solution, enduring another disappointment. "I was exactly where you are 3 years ago," Dorothy said quietly, her voice dropping to something more serious, more intimate. "Couldn't get out of bed some mornings. My joints were so bad I couldn't dress myself. I felt like my body was shutting down, like I was just waiting to die. Then someone told me about something so simple, so ridiculously basic, that I almost laughed in their face, but I was desperate. I had nothing left to lose." Margaret felt something stir in her chest. Not hope, she learned not to hope, but perhaps curiosity, or maybe just the desperate attention of a drowning person reaching for anything that might float. "What was it?" Her voice betrayed her desperation, but she didn't care anymore about hiding her need. "Lemon and baking soda," Dorothy said simply, "mixed in a very specific way, taken at a very specific time. I know it sounds ridiculous." "I've tried lemon water," Margaret interrupted, feeling her brief moment of interest deflate like a punctured balloon. "Everyone says to drink lemon water. It didn't do anything. Nothing changed." "This is different," Dorothy insisted, leaning forward with an intensity Margaret hadn't seen before. "It's not about just drinking lemon water. It's about the ratio, the precise timing, and understanding what it actually does chemically in your body. It's not magic, Maggie. It's not some mystical cure. It's basic chemistry that addresses the root cause of what's happening to you." Dorothy pulled out her phone with steady hands, hands that worked properly, fingers that bent without pain, and scrolled through her photos. She found what she was looking for and turned the screen toward Margaret. The photo showed a woman who looked ancient, hunched over, gray, defeated, hollow-eyed. It took Margaret several seconds to recognize Dorothy in that image. "That's really you?" Margaret whispered, unable to believe what she was seeing. 3 years ago, 6 months before I started the lemon and baking soda protocol." Dorothy swiped to another photo, this one showing the woman sitting across from Margaret, now vibrant, healthy, alive. "This was taken 6 months after I began. I'm not saying it cured everything. I'm not promising miracles. But the inflammation went down dramatically. The pain became manageable instead of unbearable. My mind cleared like someone had opened windows in a stuffy room. I got my life back, Maggie. My actual life." Margaret stared at the photos, then at Dorothy's face, then back at the photos. The transformation was impossible, unbelievable, yet the evidence sat across from her, breathing and smiling and radiating health. For the first time in months, maybe years, Margaret felt something flicker in her chest. It wasn't quite hope. She'd been disappointed too many times, tried too many solutions that failed, invested too much energy in changes that never came. But it was something, maybe curiosity, maybe the smallest, most fragile possibility that she didn't have to live like this forever, that there might be a way back to herself. "Will you show me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dorothy's smile was warm and genuine, and filled with something Margaret recognized as understanding. True understanding from someone who'd walked this path before. "I'll do better than that, Maggie. I'll teach you exactly how to do it. I'll write down every detail. I'll check on you every single day for the first week to make sure you're doing it correctly and to help you through the difficult parts. But you have to commit. You have to promise me you'll give it time. It won't work overnight. Your body needs time to respond, to heal, to detoxify. Can you do that?" Margaret looked at the prescription bottles lined up on her counter, her pharmaceutical army that had failed to win any battles. She looked at Dorothy's bright eyes, her straight posture, her capable hands that worked without pain. What did she have to lose? She was already lost, already defeated, already disappearing. "Okay," she said, and was surprised by the strength in her own voice. It had been months since she'd heard herself sound like that, decisive, determined, alive. "Show me. Please show me." Dorothy arrived the next morning with supplies, organic lemons, aluminum-free baking soda, and a notebook filled with her careful handwriting. They sat at Margaret's kitchen table as morning light filtered through the windows. "The science is straightforward," Dorothy began, arranging the items on the table. "When you mix fresh lemon juice with baking soda in the right ratio, you create alkalinity in your body. Most diseases, inflammation, toxins, they thrive in acidic environments. This mixture helps neutralize that acidity." Dorothy demonstrated with practiced precision. She cut a lemon in half, squeezed it into a glass. Half a fresh lemon, squeezed completely. 1/3 teaspoon of aluminum-free baking soda. She measured carefully, then added the powder to the juice. The mixture fizzed vigorously, bubbling up like a tiny volcano. "Let it fizz completely. This reaction is crucial. Then add 8 ounces of filtered water. Drink it first thing in the morning, 30 minutes before eating anything." Margaret wrote everything down with shaking hands, her arthritic fingers cramping around the pen. Each word was a struggle, but she forced herself to capture every detail. "Here's the key," Dorothy continued, her voice firm. "You do this every morning for 2 weeks minimum. Your body needs time to respond. You might feel worse at first, that's the toxins being flushed out. The detox phase can be brutal. Don't give up." Margaret started the next morning, following the instructions exactly. The mixture tasted strange, lemony but flat, slightly salty from the baking soda. She drank it down in several swallows and waited, monitoring her body for any sign of change. Nothing happened. She made breakfast 30 minutes later, took her usual prescription pills, and went about her painful day. Her joints ached. Her mind felt foggy. Everything remained exactly as it had been. Day 2 brought no change. Day 3 felt the same, perhaps slightly worse. By day 4, Margaret questioned whether she was wasting her time with false hope. On day 5, Dorothy found her crying at the kitchen table, the morning mixture sitting untouched before her. "It's not working," Margaret sobbed, her voice breaking. "I feel terrible. Even worse than before. I can't do this anymore." Dorothy sat beside her without hesitation. "This is the detox phase, Maggie. Your body is purging years of accumulated toxins. It has to get worse before it gets better. I went through exactly this on my day 5. Please give it one more week." Margaret didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to return to her familiar resignation. But something in Dorothy's steady gaze, in her unwavering confidence, made her nod reluctantly. Days 6 and 7 crawled by in discomfort. Margaret felt like she had a low-grade flu that wouldn't break. But she kept her promise. Every morning she made the mixture and forced it down. Then day 8 arrived and something shifted. Margaret woke up and realized the fog in her head had lifted slightly. She could think more clearly. Her thoughts felt sharper, more connected. Her joints still hurt, but the pain felt less intense, less all-consuming. By day 10, she gripped her coffee cup without wincing. Her fingers closed around the handle smoothly, obeying her commands without protest. By day 12, she made it through the entire morning without needing to rest. She moved through her house with a freedom she'd forgotten existed. On day 14, Margaret stood in her kitchen and cried again, but this time from relief, from disbelief, from a joy so profound it hurt. She could move her fingers without pain. She could think clearly. She felt like herself again. That afternoon, Dorothy came over for her daily check-in and stopped short at the back door. Margaret knelt in her garden for the first time in a year, pulling weeds with bare hands that actually worked. Dirt caked under her fingernails. Her knees pressed into the soil. Her body moved with purpose. "I don't understand," Margaret said, sitting back on her heels with tears streaming down her face. "How is this possible? It's just lemon and baking soda." "It's not just anything," Dorothy replied, kneeling beside her. "It's giving your body what it needs to heal itself. All those medications were treating symptoms. This addresses the root cause, the toxic, acidic environment in your body." Margaret looked at her hands, her capable, functioning hands, and felt something break open inside her chest. Not despair this time. Hope. Real, solid hope. 3 weeks later, Margaret attended Emma's birthday party. She lifted her granddaughter into her arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. Sarah watched from across the room, tears in her eyes. "Mom, what happened to you?" Sarah asked later, her voice filled with wonder. "You look like you again." Margaret pulled out the small notebook Dorothy had given her, now filled with her own observations. "I found something that worked. Something simple that doctors don't talk about because it's too simple, too inexpensive." She spent the next hour explaining everything to Sarah, measuring out the mixture, writing down the instructions. Sarah watched with the same desperate hope Margaret had felt weeks ago. "I'm starting tomorrow," Sarah said quietly. "I've been having my own problems. Brain fog, fatigue, pain." Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand firmly, without pain. "Start tomorrow. Give it 2 weeks. Don't give up when it gets hard. And then share it with someone else who needs it." That night, Margaret sat in her garden under the stars, feeling the cool earth beneath her bare feet. She thought about the months she'd lost to pain and despair, the moments with her grandchildren she'd missed. She couldn't get those back, but she had now. She had tomorrow. She had her life. The prescription bottles were gone from her counter, replaced with a simple bowl of organic lemons and a box of baking soda. Her doctor would disapprove. The medical establishment would call her foolish, but her body, her clear mind, her functioning joints, her reclaimed energy told a different story. Margaret pulled out her phone and called her sister Linda in Ohio, who'd been suffering the same way for years. "Linda, I need to tell you something. You're going to think I'm crazy, but you have to listen. I found something that changed everything." As she explained, she heard Linda's voice shift from skepticism to cautious interest to desperate hope. The same progression she'd gone through, the same transformation waiting on the other side. When she hung up, Margaret made a decision. She would share this with everyone who needed it. She would write it down, create simple instructions, teach her friends at church, post in community groups, not to make money, not to sell anything. Just to give back what Dorothy had given her, a way out of the darkness, a simple mixture that cost pennies but delivered freedom. She looked at her hands again, flexing her fingers in the moonlight, still amazed by their painless movement. This was her second chance. She wouldn't waste it.